Hey everybody, welcome to this video presentation on Windows Server 2008 R2 Certificate Services. This is a video about auto-enrollment, and we're going to use a very basic user authentication example. First, let's look at the benefits, and then we'll look at the steps how to actually set up the auto-enrollment. The first thing is, if you want to get a certificate, the old-fashioned traditional way of obtaining a certificate would be to go to the workstation, and when you install certificate services, it creates a cert-serve folder, and you can authenticate. Now I'm logged in as administrator, but I'm going to authenticate as administrator, just as an example. And when I connect to the website, I can request a certificate. I can choose an advanced request, and I can submit my request to the CA. And then once I'm at the website, I can select the template that I'm going to build a certificate from. I can then submit that request to build a certificate from that template. Then over at the server, the request will come in to the certificate authority. And that would come in as a pending request. Somebody would have to interact to approve the request, then notify me about it. Once I'm notified, then I could go back to the server and view the status of my pending request and actually pick up my certificate. So it's kind of like it's a three-step process. I got to generate my request. I send it to the server. It's marked as pending. Some certificate manager has to approve the request. Then they have to notify me that it's ready. Then I got to come back in and pick it up. So it's kind of like a three-step process. So here's the idea. The basic idea of auto-enrollment is instead of going through those three steps to get the certificate to the user, instead of you walking them through it step by step or taking control of their desktop and doing it for them, or whatever the procedure you would put in place, or maybe writing a script upon authentication, or whatever the case may be, to make it easier for you, what you can do for internal certificate deployment. Now keep in mind, we're not working with the outside world here at all. This is all internal Active Directory type of deployment. We can take advantage of auto-enrollment. Now there's some steps to setting up auto-enrollment, which I'm going to show you here in just a minute. But the benefits are: it reduces administrative effort. You go from 3 steps to 1 step. And that 1 step is all the user has to do is log on. And that's it. Allows for wider deployment, maybe due to the restrictions in your organization, due to the administrative overhead and the difficulty. Maybe you use the certificates, but not with everybody you wanted to. Now, because it's going to be so much easier, you can more easily deploy it across the organization where it's needed. Very easy to implement, fast to deploy, and the magic happens over there on step 6, on the steps for setting up auto-enrollment when the user logs in. Once all the policies are in place and everything's set up, all the user has to do is log in, and bam, they get their certificate that can be used to authenticate. So it makes it really, really easy to deploy that certificate out. Now what we have in our environment in this video presentation is Active Directory. We have a certificate server that's the issuer that's already been built. And we have an IIS website with the certificate bound to the website. We are requiring SSL on the data folder, but we're going to take this to another level and require the user to authenticate with a certificate against that folder. Let's take a look. So here's the current configuration on our folder. We have SSL required, but we're not currently requiring a user certificate. So if I go over to my workstation and let me log off, and I'm going to log in as a user. Let me just show you my OU structure here real quick. I'm going to log in as a user Tom. So I'm going to log in as Tom. And you might have noticed that Tom was in the Pats OU for all you Patriot fans out there. And we're going to log in as Tom ITVC/Tom. Log in as Tom. And we're going to try to get access to the website. We're just going to go to Cool Web. We're going to try data with an S because SSL is required. So we're going to try to connect with an S. And we connect no problem. Now I'm just going to make one little change. I'm going to require a client certificate. Now this client certificate can either be a user certificate or a computer certificate. Remember, the user certificate is like a driver's license, and the computer certificate would be like your license plate that would be good for everybody in the car or for anybody using the computer. So we're using the driver's license / user certificate analogy. So we're going to require that now. We're going to add the S and go to data. And we're going to see that we require a user certificate, but Tom has not received a certificate yet. If we go back to the website and choose ignore, and then simply retry, the user has access. So that's a very powerful little setting right there. We're going to put it back on require. Try it again. And the user is denied access because the user doesn't have the proper certificate. So to make sure that the user can receive the certificate, we got to go through the process of setting up some way for the user to get access. One way would be for the user to go through the web-based process, which is 3 steps, or to use the auto-enrollment, which, as long as all the group policies are in place and certificate is set up correctly, all the user has to do is just log in. That's it. The user logs in, it issues the user the certificate, which is built from the template. Once the user has the certificate, they can then be prompted that the certificate's valid, and they can go on and connect on through to that protected folder. So those are the overall steps of what happens when the user tries to get to this data folder when we require a client certificate. And let me just put a note down here that we're requiring a client certificate. So until Tom has that certificate, Tom can't get access to that folder. As a matter of fact, nobody has a certificate to authenticate yet, so nobody can get to the folder unless they have that certificate. So it's a very broad stroke. Okay, so what we're going to do right now is we're going to go through the steps and show you how to set up auto-enrollment. The first thing, number 1, which we can see right here on our list, number 1, create a duplicate. So what we're going to do on our CA is we're going to take a look at what we have first. I've already created a snap-in, and in the snap-in I've added 2 tools. The Certificate Authority Management tool, and then we have the Certificate Template snap-in that lists every single template that's available on our server to build a certificate from. So these are templates that we build the certificates from. And if I look at a user template, by default, I can't really make a lot of changes to it. Everything's kind of grayed out. So the initial templates are very limited in what you can do with them. You get the default settings in the template. You can build a certificate from the template, but you're stuck with whatever these default settings are. And on the Security tab, there's no option for something called auto-enroll. So we can only give the user full control, read, write, and enroll. We don't have the option to give auto-enroll. So the first step I have to go through is to create a duplicate. So on my Certificate Authority server, I'm going to right-click on my template and choose Duplicate Template. Now I have a choice between either a version 2 and a version 3. The first one, it doesn't say version 2 anywhere, but this Windows Server 2003 Enterprise is a version 2. The version 3 is the 2008, which is a new feature that came out with 2008 CAs, which gives me some special cryptographic functions for some government-based regulations called Suite B encryption. We're just going to keep it simple and stick to a version 2. The great thing about making a duplicate template is that once you make a duplicate of your original default template, you can start tweaking it. We're going to give this one a new name, user v2. One of the cool things you can do is change the validity period and the renewal period. By default, it's going to take this template, and any certificates built from this template will be published into Active Directory by default. And of course, now that it's a duplicate, we could change our minds and not do that, which we couldn't have done that before. Request handling. And what we're going to do is allow the enrollment of the subject without requiring any user input. And this is very important because we want the whole process to be hands-off. We don't want the user to be prompted for any type of information during the auto-enrollment process when they're building the certificate from this template. So there's one little tweak we have to do with the subject information. See where it says enroll subject without requiring any user input. So we go to subject name, right? Subject name. And since we don't currently have any email configured on our user accounts, we're going to take away the requirement for email. Now, if I had an Exchange server and the user objects already had an email address associated with them, then I wouldn't have to worry about it. But since I don't have email set up, I'm going to remove that requirement. I can choose not to store certificate and requests in the database. I can say not to include revocation information in issued certificates. Issuance requirements. If there's another template out there that I want this one to replace, I can add it here. And then this new certificate built from this template will replace any certificate built from a template that I add in this list. So kind of an interesting concept, right? Any certificates built from this template will replace any of the certificates built from this template I add in this window. I can add some extensions for some additional features. And now these issuance policies are kind of interesting because they can actually, they can be a path like to what the corporate policies are for encryption and certificates. And security. Now, here's the main thing I wanted to show you. The difference between the original template and the duplicate, or this version 2, is we now have this auto-enroll permission that we didn't have before. And what we're going to do is give Tom allow read, allow enroll, and allow auto-enroll permissions. And this is step number 2. Assign allow read, allow enroll, and allow auto-enroll. Now technically, authenticated users already have read, allow read, and domain users already have allow enroll. So really, all Tom needs is auto-enroll, but I just like to see all 3 checked. I'm a little paranoid. Technically though, all he needs is auto-enroll. And this could also be for a group. I can also give a computer permissions to this object or a group of computers if I was deploying a computer certificate. Now in this analogy, it's just user, so a user or a group of users. But if it was for computers, it could be a computer or a group of computers. Remember, computers are people too in the Microsoft object world. Okay, so we now have our version 2. But that version 2 is not on the list of what I can currently issue. So what I have to do is right-click and choose New, Certificate Template to Issue. Now this is a real important concept right here. This is where I get into actually publishing the template. This is a list of all the templates, potentially, that I could build certificates from. This is a list of what I currently can build certificates from. So these are the templates that I can build certificates from, and that user v2 is not on the list. So I got to right click, choose New, Certificate Template to Issue, and I'm going to select that user v2. And it adds it to the list. So now I have a brand new template that can be used to build certificates from. And it's got to be a duplicate for that auto-enroll permission or it won't work. And that was step number 3. So right there, we just published the new template. We just published the new template. Right? So that's pretty cool. So now we're going to create a group policy. Number 4, create and link the user computer auto-enrollment policy. So now we're going to create that policy. So we switch over to our domain controller. We're going to go into group policy management. We're going to switch over to group policy management. And now we're going to create a brand new policy. And I like to call it auto enrollment users, because there's two different types of auto-enrollment policies. There's an auto-enrollment for users, and there's an auto-enrollment for computers. Either we're going to issue driver's licenses to people, certificates for authentication to the users, or we're going to issue a license plate to the car, a certificate to the computer. Those are kind of the two options you have. Pretty good analogy. And what we're going to do is edit that policy. And just to show you real quick, there is an auto-enrollment under security settings, public key policies. There is an auto-enrollment on the computer side of the policy. Again, if I wanted to issue a certificate to the computer, like issuing a license plate to a car, versus user policies, where I can actually issue a driver's license to the user automatically. It'd be kind of like just walking in the DMV, just the act of opening the door and walking in. Oh, I got my driver's license. It's kind of an interesting idea, right? So that's pretty cool. Or wherever you go to get your license plate. When you drive your car in, they just put a license plate in your car just by the act of driving in. This whole auto-enrollment thing is really, really cool. So we're going to go to the user side because this is for users. We're going to right-click on the Certificate Services Client Properties, Enable Auto-Enrollment. And we have some options here. We can renew expired certificates, update pending certificates, and remove revoked certificates. Probably not a bad idea. Update certificates that use certificate templates. And we can put an expiration notification. As we get close to the end of the lifetime of our certificate, we'll get a little pop-up on our system tray that will notify us what's going on. And that's how you turn it on. Now, in group policy, there's no OK anywhere. It's a little strange. You just simply close the editor, and then we're going to link the policy to the OU where the user lives. Now, if we go back into Active Directory, we can see that we have Tom and Wes. But you got to remember that we only gave, back down here in our user v2, remember we only gave Tom permissions to the template. So even though both users are in the PATS-OU and both are affected by the auto-enrollment policy, only one of those two users has permissions to the template. So we just completed step number 4. We created and linked the user-based auto-enrollment policy to the OU where the user was. And always keep in mind, if it was a computer policy, we'd have to link it to the OU where the computer is located at. So now number 5, we're going to refresh the policy with GP Update. So we're switching over to the Windows 7 computer. We're logged in as Tom. We're going to type in GP Update force, and that's going to refresh that policy we just put out there. We want to make sure that the computer is aware of the policy so that when the user logs in, the user can pick up that change. So I'm updating the policies here. I'm going to exit, and I'm going to log off. Now that that policy's been refreshed, I'm going to log off, and I'm going to log back in as Tom. And simply the act of walking in the DMV, simply the act of logging in, if everything's set up right, the CA should automatically issue the certificate. So we're going to look at our issued certificates, and boom, just like that. From this version 2 template that is now on the list of templates that can be used to build certificates, a certificate was built from that template, and all Tom had to do was walk in the door. All he had to do is log in. So keep in mind, on our website, we require a client certificate. In this case, a driver's license, a client certificate. Tom is going to go back to the website. Cool web, no problem. And we're going to try to go to the site without the S, because remember, it requires SSL. That's this, requiring SSL, not to be confused with this. Let's put the S in front of it for the SSL. And let's try it. And boom, just like that, his certificate comes up. We can view his certificate, and we can see the path to the issuer. Now we have a single tier PKI, so I just see the 1. If I had a 2-tier, I would see the issuer and the root. If I had a 3-tier, I would see the root, the intermediate, and the issuer. But in a 1-tier, we just have that one level. When I click on Tom's certificate, this is grayed out because this is actually his certificate. We can see the certificate, the serial number, the signing of the certificate from the issuer, all this information right here. Now, the issuer information is important. It's valid for 2 years. The subject information, we can see the OU that he lives in, all that detail. We can also see his public key. There it is, his public key. Now, one of the most important things here would be the CRL distribution point. And we're going to look at this in the next video, how by default, built into every certificate, is the path to the certificate revocation list, which is a file that the user is forced to download and look at before they can ever authenticate. So every single time a user goes to authenticate with a certificate, before they ever authenticate, they have to download this list of all the revoked certificates. Do I know that that license is really valid? It'd be kind of like before I sit down to get my haircut. And I know nobody would ever do this, but imagine sitting down to get your haircut. And you would ask the person cutting your hair, the hairstylist, to let you see their license. And before you would ever get your haircut, you would actually contact the state agency that issued the license and ask them to give you a list of all the licenses that have been revoked for hairstylists. I mean, you would never do that, but I mean, just as an analogy. Or maybe it would be like if a police officer pulled you over, and when the police officer pulls you over, he takes your driver's license, makes sure it hasn't expired. You can see the expiration date. So let's say it hasn't expired yet, and he looks at the picture, it looks like the date doesn't look like you've aged too much or gained too much weight. The photo looks good, the date of birth seems to line up with that. The expiration date on the driver's license seems to be okay. But he's going to do one more thing. He's going to go back to his car, check in the state database to see whether or not your driver's license has been revoked due to a DUI or whatever. Do you have a suspended license? It's probably one of the most important aspects of understanding certificates is the revocation list. And it's important to understand that every single time you go to use that certificate to authenticate to this website, that before you ever authenticate, this list is downloaded and you're forced to check the list to see whether or not you're revoked. If you're revoked, then you can't go in. The other thing that I think is important is the AIA information, and this is the location where the certificate is published. And if you look real close at both of these, the URL is an LDAP path. That's an Active Directory. The same thing is true with the AIA. And if we switch over to our drawing, we can see that that information for the AIA in the CDP, the location of the revocation list, is published to Active Directory. So the client knows where to go look for that information and download that information to know whether or not the root issuer's certificate is good. We need to know that his certificate is good, and we need to know about the revocation list, which is the CDP. And that is checked every single time. Very, very important. And those two things are built into the certificate. We can also see some interesting things, the thumbprint, an identifying item on the certificate. And the other thing I wanted to show you was the template. Now remember, we used a template that is a user v2. We made that duplicate of that original user template, and we can actually see the details of that template. And then there's your public key. The other important thing would be the signature. And just to kind of show what happened, on the CA, we built this user version 2 template. So from the user, we right-clicked and made a duplicate, and we made a user v2. Because of the group policy that we created in Active Directory, when the user logged in, the user went out right away and looked to see if there are any certificates that he had permissions to auto-enroll. And one of those was that brand new one that was added to the list. We published user v2 as a new template on the list of available templates to build certificates from. A certificate for the user was built from this template. So a brand new certificate was built. And that certificate was signed by this issuer's private key. So this server that built the certificate signed this brand new certificate with his private key. And then when you logged in, this was automatically brought down and put into your certificate store. And that's what we're looking at right here on this computer, is this. This is Tom's certificate that he obtained automatically. So to continue along, we did the refresh, we logged in, we verified the certificate deployment. We're at the workstation, we're looking at all the details. There's the signature from the issuer. There's the public key. We verified everything looks good now. Here's the moment of truth. We click OK, and bam, just like that, the user has access to the folder. Now to prove a point, remember that if we look at the certificate authority, looking back at the template that we built, the version 2, remember that we only gave Tom permissions. Now Wes lives in the same OU as Tom, but Wes was never given permissions to the template. So if I log off and log in as Wes, I'm going to open up the browser. I'm going to go to www.coolweb.local. That should work, no problem. I have nothing going on there at the root of the website. I'm going to try data, and I'm going to try it with the S. Now let's take a look at it. SSL is required, which I'm going to put in, but it's also requiring that the client have a certificate. So the question is, would Wes receive the certificate? And the answer is no, because we never gave Wes permissions to the template. So all we're going to do right now is add Wes, give him permissions to the template, the same that Tom had. We're going to log off as Wes. Now he's using the same computer as Tom, which may not be the greatest example in the world, but when he logs in, if the policy is set up correctly, simply the act of logging in, since the permission has been changed on the template, we should be able to check our CA, and let's check and see if a certificate was built from the user v2 template. Let's look and see. And bam, look at that. How great is that? Just like that, bam, Wes received a certificate. Didn't have to refresh the policy. All I had to do was log in. The policy had already been refreshed. So now Wes can open up the website, and there's his certificate. Require SSL, require client certificate. Wes has his driver's license. He can view it just like we did before. You can see the certification path. You know, something else I didn't show you before, we can also go all the way to the root and view the certificate of the root to make sure it's something that we trust as well. We can see the public key of the root. We can see the template that was used to build it. There's a CA template. There's the actual public key. We can see the signing that occurred. So we're actually looking at this self-signed certificate here on the root of the server that was in charge of issuing that user v2 down to Tom. And now Wes also has the same type of certificate. So Wes also has a certificate that was built and deployed. So now both Tom and Wes have a valid driver's license to get into that airport. So that's pretty cool. And then we just did that. So the very last step here is we access the restricted file or folder. We could see with Tom that we had access. We could see with Wes that we didn't. They both were affected by the auto-enrollment policy, but Wes didn't have permissions to the actual certificate. And so you can actually see how that works. So it's important to note that the auto-enrollment policy is great, but if you don't have permissions to the template that builds the certificate, the auto-enrollment doesn't help you. It can also be noted that we did it for individual users. There would be nothing wrong with going to the template, and on the template, instead of giving individual users permissions, giving a group of users. If it was a computer certificate, it would be for a group of computers. So just keep in mind this can be for users or computers either way. Also keep in mind that we linked the policy to the OU where the users were. I should make a note of that right here. Because this was a user policy, the linking of the policy, we linked at the OU, we linked the policy at the OU where the user objects lived. If it was a computer policy, we linked it at the OU where the computer objects lived. So we specifically were doing it at the OU where the users lived. A lot of companies will have like an OU with just users in it, and then an OU with just computers in it. If the users and computers are all in the same OU, it really wouldn't make a whole lot of difference. Okay? And then the last thing I want to show you before we go to the next video, would be this. Now we have the certificates issued. We can see the connection. Remember we talked about how here on the server, when we right click on certificate templates and click new, certificate template to issue, that would be taking a certificate template that's on that master list of templates and adding it to the current list of what can be issued. So this is a list of what could be issued. This is a list of what's currently being issued, and we can add to that list. We call that publishing a template. When we issued the certificate to the user, this certificate got published into Active Directory. So when the CA issued the certificate to the user, it also took that information and published that into AD. So we can see that here. We can right click on either Tom or Wes and go to Properties and look under Published Certificates, and we can see the certificate published to Active Directory. And that can be useful in the future for other applications that need to recognize the fact that Tom has a certificate connected to him. So when Tom logged in, how did the computer know that Tom had a certificate? Tom is a domain account, and on the properties of Tom, that's where the certificate is connected. That's how we knew that he had it at the workstation. We can do the same thing with Wes. Go to the properties of Wes, go to Publish Certificates, and see it connected to the user there. We can also manually add a certificate to the user from the store on the server or from a file, most likely from a file. We can remove the certificate, or we can actually copy the certificate out. And then the private key would live on the machine where the user is in his profile. And we could export the private key from the machine and copy the certificate here. We could also copy the certificate off of the CA as well. So there you go. So there you have it. The last thing we're going to talk about is the fact that we've issued these certificates. In the next video, what we're going to discuss is what happens if we find out that Tom is no longer a good quarterback. I guess we would just simply have to revoke his certificate. And there's an option here on revocation. So in the next video, we're going to take a look at how to revoke the user certificate after the successful auto-enrollment, just in case Tom has gone bad. Thank you very much. We'll see you guys in the next video.